Good afternoon, dear all students. Today will be our last session of live and TV shooting, and I hope you are all holding well. Today we want to talk about Unit 8 and 9 from the book Language Leader, and we want to talk about different topics. We want to talk about adjectives, gradable, non-gradable. We want to talk about adverbs, and finally we want to review relative pronoun. If you remember, we have already talked about it. So let's start. First of all, let's talk about gradable adjectives. What do I mean by gradable adjectives? We have two types of adjectives, gradable and non-gradable. When I tell you that some adjectives are gradable, it means that you can make that adjective stronger or weaker. As it has mentioned here, most adjectives are gradable. This means we can have different levels of that actually quality. We can make them weaker or stronger with modifier. What do I mean by modifier? You can put some kind of adverbs before the adjectives. You can make it weaker or stronger. Very or really, a bit, a little, we are going to talk about them. Look at this photo. How are you feeling in this photo? You can be a bit cold. What about the next one? Here, you can be very cold. What about the next one? You can be extremely cold. As you can see here, in the three different sentences, by using different modifiers, I just try to make them different, stronger or weaker. Yes, I just tried by using different modifiers, make that adjective, which is cold here, make it weaker or stronger. So we call this kind of adjective gradable adjective. So as I told you earlier, we need some kind of modifiers to make the adjective weaker or stronger. Modifiers are a little, a bit, pretty, quite, really, very, extremely. By these modifiers, we can make the adjectives weaker or stronger. Some gradable adjectives are angry, big, boring, cheap, cold, and so on. You can see the list here. So you can be a little angry, pretty angry, really angry, or extremely angry. Yes? But on the other hand, we have another types of adjectives, which we call them non-gradable adjectives. When we say non-gradable adjectives, it means that you cannot put some kind of modifiers before them. We can use, but not all of them. In that cases, in the adjective itself, we have got very. The adjective has got very by itself in itself, okay? So we are going to talk about them just right here. As I told you, some adjectives like amazing, awful, and boiling are non-gradable. They already contain the idea of very in their definitions. If we want to make extreme adjectives stronger, the only modifiers that we can use are absolutely or really. Look at these examples. Did you see the final match? It was absolutely amazing. So after 32 hours of traveling, they were absolutely exhausted. Or my trip home was really awful. Awful by itself means very actually tired. So you cannot say that very awful or very bad, bad. So you cannot say that very, very bad. Instead of that, you can say really awful. Let's have a look at some kind of extreme adjectives or non-gradable adjectives here. As you can see in this list, we have got a gradable adjective, and on the other hand, we have non-gradable adjectives. Angry. Angry, you can say very angry, or instead you can say furious. Big, you can say very big, or you can say instead huge. You cannot say very huge, it is not correct, but you can say extremely huge or really huge. This is the list, and I will share this PowerPoint with your teachers. They will share with you. Don't worry about the list of the adjectives. So this is about adjectives, gradable and non-gradable adjectives. The second topic that we want to talk about today is the adverb. And what about the adverb? We want to talk about the place of the adverbs, where we put the adverbs. As you know, we have different types of adverbs. Adverbs of manner, adverbs of time, adverbs of place, and so on. But what it is important really about these adverbs is that where we should put them, at the beginning of the sentence, at the end of the sentence. I'm definitely sure that you are really concerned about this issue. Let's just look at the examples. We usually put adverbs of time and manner at the end of the clause, usually. For example, I will study now. As you see, now is the adverb of time, so we put it at the end of the sentence. Or she sings well. Well is an adverb, and we put it at the end of the sentence. We can emphasize adverb of time and place by putting them at the beginning of the clause. If you want to put emphasis on the sentence or on the adverb by putting them at the beginning of the sentence, you are totally fine. Here is the winner. My focus, my emphasis is on this adverb, so I put it at the beginning of the sentence. Or now I will study. So my focus, my emphasis is on the adverb. Because of that, I put it at the beginning of the sentence. About the adverbs of frequency, certainty, and degree. About these adverbs, most of the time we put them after the subject before the main verb. You are totally familiar with adverbs of frequency. Always, usually, sometimes, how often you do something. We put them after the subject, before the main verb. But only sometimes, be careful, keep in your mind, only sometimes can come before subject as well. For example, I sometimes go to school by bus. I sometimes go to school by bus after the subject, or you can put sometimes before the subject. Sometimes I go to school. Only sometimes have this rule, can be after the subject or before the subject. But about others adverbs of frequency, we put them all after the subject, before the verb. Look at the examples here. We usually put adverbs of frequency, certainty, and degree in the middle of a clause between the subject and the verb, as I mentioned earlier. Look at these examples. I always brush my teeth after eating food. You probably left your mobile phone in the taxi. His work mainly focuses on the human body. As you can see in all of these sentences, the adverbs of frequency is exactly after the subject. But if the verb is to be and is are, these to be verbs, we can put the adverb after the verb. Actually, it should be after the verb. She is a perfectly happy girl. Yeah, so these are the things that we had on Unit 9. In Unit 10, we have relative pronoun. We had talked about them earlier, and I'm definitely sure that you already knew about them, but just let's review. By adverbs of relative clauses, we have different things. We have defining relative clauses and non-defining relative clauses. Let's start with defining relative clause. Defining relative clauses are information we add to a sentence, but this information is essential. It is because it is essential as important, we cannot delete it from the sentence. As you can see here, I have put the word essential in colorful, and it is important. This information, this clause is really important for us. So we cannot remove it from the sentence. We cannot take it out from the sentence. We cannot separate it from the sentence by putting comma. Yeah, do you remember them? So we usually use a relative pronoun who, that, which, whose, and whom to introduce a defining relative clauses. We will talk about them in details. So Look at this example. This is the lesson that will answer all your questions. Look at the colorful, it is in red. That will answer all your questions. This is the lesson that will answer all your questions. I shouldn't put pause here. I shouldn't put comma here. I should read it just like this. This is the lesson that will answer all your questions. Why? Because this part of the clause, this clause which we call relative clause, is essential for us. It is important. If you take it out from the sentence, that remaining sentence is meaningless. It doesn't make sense. See, this is the lesson. Without the second part is meaningless. So it is important for us. They are the people who visited our house. They are the people by itself is meaningless. Without the second part, which is the relative pronoun, defining relative pronoun, who visited our house, is meaningless. So we need both of them. They are important and they actually relate to each other. Yeah. As I told you, they were defining relative clauses, and defining relative clause is essential, important for us. We cannot remove it from the sentence. We cannot separate it from the rest of the sentence. But on the other hand, we have non-defining relative clause. Non-defining relative clause, we can separate it from the sentence. We can take it out. We put pause or comma before and after the relative clause because it gives us extra information, because it is optional. As you can see, extra, yeah, it is extra information. It is not necessary. Without that part, the sentence is not meaningless. It has a complete meaning because it is only extra information. We add it to the sentence in order to give the listener or reader extra information. Let's look at some examples. We use it to give extra information, as I mentioned here, and also it is not necessary. And also, again, we can use relative pronoun who, which, whose, whom, but not that. This is the second differentiation between defining clause and non-defining clause, that we cannot use that to introduce a non-defining relative clause. We use commas around the non-defining clause as well. So we look at the examples and you can understand it much better. This lesson, which you can watch on Üsküdar University TV channel, will answer all your questions. Yeah, read it carefully. I put pause before and after that underlined part, which you can watch on Üsküdar University TV channel. So without that part, look at this one. This lesson will answer all your questions. Is it meaningful? Yes, it is meaningful. Yes, without that part, the sentence is complete. It just adds some extra information. So notice that we can take these non-defining relative clauses out of this sentence and they still make sense. As I told you earlier, you can delete this part because it is extra information. You can see here, this lesson will answer all your questions. Yeah, the sentence is meaningful, the sentence makes sense, and you can understand what the speaker means by that because it gives you only extra information. Let's talk about punctuation. As I told you earlier, punctuation is something really important here because, as you remember, in defining relative clause, we never put comma. We never make pause before defining relative clause. Why not? Because that part is important, essential for us. By putting comma, you mean that no, it's not important. So we never do that. If you put comma, you mean that that part, that clause is not important. So in defining relative clause, we don't have any comma, we don't make any pauses. But In non-defining relative clause, on the other hand, yes, we put comma before and after the relative pronoun, which is non-defining relative pronoun. And in this way, we show that this information is extra. This information is not necessary. And if you want, you can take it out from the sentence. Look at here. A defining relative clause is crucial to the sentence, so we don't pause before we say it, or we don't separate it from the sentence with commas. This is the lesson that will answer all your questions. So, I didn't pause, and I haven't put any commas here, because this part is essential. This part is important for us. But on the other hand, look at this sentence, okay? Look at this sentence. This lesson, comma, which you can watch on Üsküdar University TV channel, comma, will answer all your questions. What does it mean? It means that this green sentence or clause can be deleted because it is not necessary, it is not essential, it is not crucial, extra information. So let's review relative pronouns. We talked about them, that we have different relative pronouns. They were who, which, what, whose, and that. The only difference was that we never used that for non-defining relative clauses. Whenever we were talking about non-defining relative clauses, others look like each other. But I'm going to talk about them one by one. First of all, who. Let's see. We use who when the relative clause relates to a person or a pet. So whenever you are talking about a person or a pet in your sentence, the relative clause must be started with who. We use who when referring to the subject, to the relative clause. Look at these examples. Emily is the person who helped me the most. This who is talk about Emily, the subject of the sentence, and it is a person. So we use who as a subject pronoun and relative pronoun. Emily, who is very helpful, showed me how to do it. As you see, one of them is defining relative pronoun, the other one is non-defining relative pronoun. How do I understand? Because I have got comma here. It is extra information. But in both sentences, I use who in order to talk about the subject of the sentence, which is a person. And about the next relative pronoun, which is whose. Whenever you are talking about possessions of the subject, when you are talking about relative pronoun, in that case, you need to use whose. Look at these examples. Burak is the chef whose kebab is the best. Who's related to Burak's kebab. Are you familiar with kebabs? Yeah? Sarah, whose father is a doctor. Whose father is a doctor? Sarah's father is a doctor. Studies medicine at university. The next one will be which. We can use the relative pronoun for any subject, any object, which instead. Yeah, it is really easy to understand. We can use subject and object as a which. So it is not human being. Be careful. In these cases, we cannot use, because you know that if it is human being, we have to use who. Here is the lesson which I have been working on. Lesson which. And that, the problematic ones, the most important one. As I told you earlier, we can use that with defining relative clause instead of relative pronouns, who and the rest. But in non-defining clause, we cannot use that one. It can be placed with who or which in defining. It is really important in defining only. Emily is the person who or that helped me the most. Here's the oh my god, sorry. I just touched the screen. Here's the lesson which or that I have been working on. In both sentences, you can see that we can use both relative pronoun, which or that, who or that. Why? Because they are defining relative clauses. But if our clause is non-defining, we cannot use that. So I hope you all enjoyed the lesson. The only things that you need is to practice. This session was the last session of the video shooting. I hope you all enjoyed all these weeks at home. I hope I can see you really soon. Thank you so much for watching and listening.